Auschwitz, the largest of Hitler's concentration camps. But behind the perimeter fence, this camp served a sinister purpose: to incarcerate and secretly murder the Jews of Europe.
From the moment he came to power, Hitler wanted to get rid of the Jews from Germany. He turned to what is known as the final solution, the extermination of all these Jewish people.
By 1944, Auschwitz was murdering 12,000 Jews a day. It was a genocide kept totally secret from the rest of the world. But one prisoner forced into slave labor was determined to tell the horrific truth to the world. Using rare archive and dramatic reconstruction, this film tells the remarkable story of Rudolf Vrba's Great Escape. Auschwitz was located 50 miles from Krakow in southern Poland. The main camp was opened in 1940. Its function was to hold and kill communists, prisoners of war, writers, gypsies, homosexuals, and intellectuals. By 1941, construction began on Auschwitz-Birkenau, 4 kilometers away from the main complex. This camp was built to imprison and exterminate mainly Jews. Tens of thousands of Jews deported from countries occupied by the Nazis were sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau each month, completely oblivious to their fate.
The deportations were always sort of camouflaged by saying the Jews were either going to some other place to work or they were going to be transported to another place.
Poles, Czechs, and many other Jews traveled in cattle wagons for days without food or water. When they arrived at Auschwitz, they were exhausted, confused, and had absolutely no idea where they were. As far as the outside world was concerned, they had just disappeared.
Secrecy was essential for the maintenance of Auschwitz, for the continuation of Auschwitz as a killing factory. The moment it became known, then there would be revolts and riots at every railway station on the way to it. The deportations were the greatest confidence trick in history because we now know that it was a total deception, that the aim of the deportation was to murder these people.
Among the many thousands of prisoners at the camp was 19-year-old Rudolf Vrba, Jewish son of a sawmill owner in Topolkany, Slovakia. In March 1942, he fled his homeland for Britain, but was captured and sent to Auschwitz. Unaware of their fate, most prisoners carried luggage stuffed with clothes and valuables. Vrba was given the job of collecting these bags and taking them into the camp. As he worked, Vrba saw time and again that prisoners arriving at the camp had no concept of what the Nazis had planned for them.
Vrba understood that had the truth of this place been known, something would be happening. First of all, the people wouldn't be arriving because they'd be refusing to get on the trains at the departure point.
The SS guards immediately separated the exhausted prisoners in half. Men were split up from their wives and children, the strong divided from the weak. The elderly, sick, disabled, and women with children were loaded into trucks and taken to an area at the rear of the camp. They were then given soap and a towel and told to strip for a shower. But it was an evil charade. They'd walked unwittingly to their death and were poisoned by Zyklon B gas. In just a few hours, the Nazis had completely disposed of all trace of their bodies.
Never before had a genocide been committed by industrial means. Auschwitz and the other death camps were industrial establishments producing corpses.
As Vrba worked, he became determined to find a way to stop the flow of Jews to Auschwitz.
He was able to say to himself, what I have to do is more important than my life, because what I have to do might be able to save thousands and tens of thousands of lives.
Vrba knew there was only one way to reveal the shocking secret of Auschwitz to the world. He had to escape. "19-year-old Rudolf Vrba was a prisoner forced into slave labor at Auschwitz, a secret Nazi extermination camp gassing Jews on an industrial scale. Those prisoners not singled out for immediate execution were treated worse than animals. Among them was Vrba's childhood friend, Otto Pressburger.
We were very close. We were like brothers. When I arrived, they took my clothes and shaved my head. I was given a uniform. Then they tattooed my chest with a number. From that moment on, I was no longer Otto Pressburger, just a number.
Jews were immediately forced into hard labor. And in a sadistic twist, Nazi guards made prisoners called capos brutalize the other inmates.
Nazis had a problem of shortage of labor, and they hit on the idea that they would force individuals from among the prisoners to supervise other prisoners. Many of them behaved very badly because they felt threatened, their lives were in danger, and so they took it out on the prisoners in order not to be punished themselves.
Freddie Nola was a prisoner of Auschwitz and witnessed this kind of brutality firsthand.
The biggest fear that we had was prisoners with the green triangles. And we feared them as much as we feared the SS because they had the power of death and life.
Jews normally didn't survive more than 6, 7, 8 weeks, at best. They became then totally apathetic to what was happening around them, and they just died off or were shipped to the gas chamber to be killed.
For those prisoners brave enough to attempt escape, the consequences were always fatal.
There had been a number of escapes from Auschwitz, and in every case, the escapee had been caught, sometimes within hours, sometimes within a few days.
Prisoners were forced to stand witness as the guards exacted brutal retribution.
The consequences of failure were torture and public execution. Anyone connected with the escape would also be tortured and murdered. So every escape attempt not only endangered the escapee, but endangered many other people as well. The price of failure was a ghastly fate.
They were first tortured in order to get out of them who helped them within the camp, and then they were killed, they were hung. All of them.
They said anyone else who wants to escape will get a gift, this rope.
But Vrba refused to be deterred by the dangers of being caught.
Vrba said from the moment he arrived to Auschwitz that he was going to be an optimist. He said that he was constantly thinking about ways to escape. He was determined to escape from Auschwitz.
As the Nazis expanded their reign of terror across Europe, more Jews were deported from their homelands and sent to Auschwitz. As the camp's crematoria burned day and night, the lingering smell of death hung in the air.
Soon, every transport that arrived, somehow the air changed. There was a sweet smell. And the old prisoners told us, "Do you see this? Can you smell this sweet smell? This is the bodies who are being burned."
Fred Wetzler, a trusted friend from Vrba's hometown in Slovakia, had managed to get a job as a registrar at the crematoria. This was the break Vrba had been waiting for. Wetzler's connections helped him to improve his status in the camp. After more than a year of hard labor, in June 1943, Vrba himself was given a new job. It would prove crucial in his bid to escape.
He was a secretary. In German it's a Schreiber, which means a person who writes. He had all kinds of administrative jobs there. He had to look after the index cards and register whatever the Nazis wanted him to register.
Vrba's new position kept him away from the brutal capos, and vitally, it meant that he could walk unchallenged almost anywhere in the camp.
This also gave him an extraordinary insight into what the camp was doing. He was in the registry. He was seeing lists of people coming in. He was able to develop an extraordinarily clear idea of the numbers of Jews who were being deported to the camp and murdered.
Outside the camp, the war raged on as the Allies fought against Germany's stranglehold of Europe. By September 1943, the Nazis had ghettoized the Jews of Czechoslovakia and began sending them to concentration camps. At the same time, the authorities at Auschwitz had constructed the Czech family camp in anticipation of their arrival. When 4,000 Czechoslovakian men, women and children filled the compound, they were allowed to keep their own clothes and their hair was left unshaven. But this was just part of the Nazis' cynical plot to ensure the true purpose of Auschwitz was kept secret.
One group of Jews coming from Theresienstadt, the concentration camp ghetto in Czechoslovakia, consisted largely of Czech Jews. And their fate was being monitored by the Red Cross.
Rumors that conditions in some concentration camps were bad had reached the Red Cross. To stop them from discovering Auschwitz's true purpose, the guards kept these Czech prisoners alive. The other Jews in the camp endured terrible conditions as the Czechs lived in comfort. For their captors, the facade of the Czech family camp served a further sinister purpose.
The deportation of Jews and of many others to camps in the East created tremendous alarm in the communities from which they had been taken. And one way in which the SS system sought to calm this alarm was what is known as the postcard deception. The Czech family camp members sent these cards back to Prague or to family members or friends in Czechoslovakia, and all seemed well.
It didn't last long. On March the 7th, 1943, confident that they had fooled the Red Cross and the outside world with their deception, the Nazis dispatched the Czechs in the family camp to the gas chambers. Disgusted by this appalling massacre, Vrba became more determined than ever to escape and warn the world. Over the following months, the Nazis' confidence grew, and they started to expand the camp into an area outside the perimeter fence. It was a clear sign they were expecting a huge influx of new Jewish prisoners, and that the campaign of extermination would reach a new level.
Now, you don't double the size of a camp which is working very effectively. It must mean there's going to be some great new arrival in terms of hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps as many as 500,000 people.
There were whispers among SS guards which suggested that a new set of Jews were destined for this area of the camp.
When they saw the scale of the barracks and how wide they were. And then the SS guards joking that, we're going to get some tasty Hungarian salami soon. What could that mean? That Hungarian Jews were coming?
There could be no doubt in his mind. Hitler must have plans to occupy Hungary, and this new area of the camp had been created to hold Hungarian Jews.
It was his desire to warn the world about this new stage of the final solution, the destruction of the Jews of Hungary, that gave urgency to his determination to escape. It's that drove him on.
In April 1944, Vrba seized the chance he was waiting for. When he and Fred Wetzler discovered they could hide in a cavity inside a woodpile used to construct new huts outside the perimeter fence. It seemed like the perfect plan. They knew from previous escape attempts that if the guards failed to find missing prisoners within 3 days, they'd call off the search. If the two of them could remain hidden for that long, they had a good chance of escape. But it was an incredible risk.
They would hide within spitting distance of the camp, while the Nazis, while the SS were searching the surrounding area. They would remain under the noses of the SS, and when the hue and cry had died down, when the dogs had gone back to the barracks, then they would make their move. They would cover the ground from the camp, out of the danger zone, to relative freedom.
On April the 7th, 1944, Vrba and Wetzler went ahead with their daring and dangerous plan. With many failed escape attempts before them, Vrba knew that if they were caught, they faced certain death. Hidden in their secret cavity, Vrba opened a tin filled with Russian tobacco soaked in petrol. The two men covered themselves in it, hoping to mask their scent from the SS dogs. Over the next hours, they listened intently to the movements of the camp. At the end of the day, they heard prisoners finishing their work and returning inside the perimeter fence. It was at roll call that the guards finally realized 2 prisoners were missing.
When they escaped, there were roll calls. They kept counting again and again.
At just after 6 o'clock, the siren finally sounded. The guards searched frantically for hours. On one occasion, they even climbed onto the log pile within feet of Vrba and Wetzler. But as it got dark, the guards headed back inside the wire, and the camp fell silent. Throughout the night, the two men were haunted by sounds of victims going to the gas chambers. But the eerie noises only made Vrba more determined to succeed in his bid to stop the trains to Auschwitz. 3 further days passed. As the Nazi guards searched, they became increasingly desperate. But incredibly, Vrba and Wetzler remained undetected. On the final night, as predicted, the guards gave up and returned inside the perimeter. It was time for Vrba and Wetzler to make their move. As they sprinted for the surrounding woods, both men knew what further risks lay ahead.
It was a tremendously dangerous journey, and the Germans had removed the Poles from all the towns and villages in the Auschwitz region and replaced them by ethnic Germans, Volksdeutsch, who were loyal, very loyal indeed, to the Reich.
It was covered with police, German troops, military convoys, on the move, very few friends.
But there was no turning back. Each passing day meant more Jews were being murdered. The race was on to reveal the truth and stop the trains to Auschwitz. Rudolf Vrba and Fred Wetzler had escaped from Auschwitz. As they trekked across Poland, it became a race against time to warn the world of the secret Nazi genocide before it was too late. With only a rough idea of their location and fearful they could be caught by German soldiers at any moment, under the cover of night and often in freezing weather, Vrba and Wetzler headed south towards the Slovakian border. As they made their way across country, staying away from roads, they ate anything they could scavenge.
It was one of the great feats of escapology and simple physical fitness. These guys were tough. They endured extraordinary hardships. They showed acute perception, knowing when to move, who they could show themselves to.
Desperate to reach Slovakia as fast as possible, on their third day, they accidentally wandered into a town. As they tried to find a way out, they stumbled right into the center. Around any corner, along any alleyway, they risked running into Nazi soldiers. Desperately tired and hungry, they decided they'd no choice but to ask for help. It was an enormous gamble, but it paid off. Greeted by a peasant woman pleased to help, She gave them breakfast and a place to sleep until it got dark. But they were less than halfway to the Slovakian border. Vrba and Wetzler had to press on. Each day that passed meant thousands more died at Auschwitz. Then, about 10 days into their trek, they stumbled into a woman tending her crops. Although suspicious at first, she introduced them to a Polish farmer who offered to show them how to cross into Slovakia without running into the Nazi soldiers. The journey took 2 days. Finally, they reached a clearing where they could safely cross the frontier. After waiting for the border patrol to pass, Vrba and Wetzler quietly slipped into Slovakia. After their extraordinary 15-day trek, covering over 140 kilometers across occupied Poland, on April 25th, Vrba and Wetzler finally reached people they believed could help. At the headquarters of the Jewish Council in Žilina, Slovakia, Vrba immediately described the appalling atrocities of Auschwitz. For the first time in the camp's terrible history, the outside world was hearing the truth. It was well known that Jewish communities throughout Europe had been deported from their homes by the Nazis and sent to mysterious destinations in the East. There were even rumors the conditions were appalling, but nobody could believe that deportation meant almost certain death.
The Germans were very good at deception and spreading out false information. The Nazis just said that they are being resettled, not even to camps, but being given housing and occupations.
As Vrba revealed the truth about the Nazis, that they had systematically murdered hundreds of thousands of people, he started to realize his audience didn't believe a word he was saying.
At first, they were just astonished by the story. They couldn't believe it because what they're talking about is the death of some of their closest friends, relatives. And if you try and think of it logically, how could it have been? How could 500 people out of 1,000 have been taken off and been gassed within a few hours and their bodies cremated? Under what system of, under what political structure, under what ideological system could that happen?
The Jewish communities in Slovakia didn't believe them at first because it was so unbelievable. Killing is one thing, but to organize the killing, to make it into a huge bureaucratic apparatus, to organize a transport, to have everything streamlined, that was so incredibly German efficiency that people simply didn't believe that it was possible.
Unconvinced, the men decided to test Vrba's story and fetched records containing the names of every Jew deported from Slovakia. They asked Vrba to recall the people he'd shared a wagon with on his journey to Auschwitz.
He had this phenomenal memory. He memorized every transport, every train that came in, how many people were on it, and how many of those people who were on it were immediately sent to the gas chamber.
As Vrba recalled their names, the men were stunned. Their book was nothing more than a list of obituaries. The friends and family they hoped would one day return after the war were already dead. Finally convinced that Vrba's horrific account was the truth, the council asked the two men to dictate a chilling report which could be copied, then distributed. But as Vrba described the horror in every detail, he warned that the extermination campaign was far from over. Auschwitz was expanding. The Jews of Hungary would be next. And they needed to be warned before it was too late.
That sounds simple. The process of writing the reports, translating the reports, getting the reports from Slovakia in the middle of a war, circulating it to people who needed to know, all of this took time.
In the Hungarian capital of Budapest, the Jewish community was running out of time. A month earlier, the Nazis had occupied the country and set their deportation plans into motion.
After the German army had occupied Hungary, the SS moved in. A special commando, a team, led by Adolf Eichmann, the man who over the previous 2.5 years had perfected the rounding up, the deportation of Jews from all over Europe to the death camps in Poland.
When Vrba's report finally reached the offices of the Jewish Council in Hungary, it caused shockwaves.
I was a volunteer in the Jewish Council, then as a junior secretary to one of the members of the council. And one day he said that a very important report has arrived that was written by 2 Slovak Jews who had escaped from one of the major death camps alive. My family was already deported when I was reading the report. I knew that I'm reading the fate of my beloved grandmother and of my uncles. And I also was quite clear about the fact that this is my fate. There were just these 2 feelings, nausea, feeling like I had to vomit. But at the same time, my brain was working, and my brain was saying, look, you are looking at the truth, and you always have to know the truth.
Rudolf Kastner, leader of the Hungarian Jewish Council, was equally stunned. But his next decision proved one of the most tragic in his nation's history. Unbelievably, Kastner took the decision not to go public with Vrba's report. The reason? Kastner's council was already involved in a high-risk strategy with the Nazis to save the Jews of Hungary from deportation. Hungarian Jewish Council member Joel Brand had held secret talks with the SS officer Adolf Eichmann, who'd made an extraordinary offer.
And he says to Brandt that I will allow 1 million Jews to go free in return for 10,000 trucks loaded with supplies.
It was barely credible that Eichmann would do such a deal. Nevertheless, Brand left Budapest to meet the British and propose the offer to trade Hungarian Jews for trucks. When he reached them, their reaction wasn't what he'd hoped for.
Brandt, in all innocence, believing this is a real deal, tells the British about his mission. They see it's a grotesque trick to allow the Germans to claim they are negotiating with the British over the fate of Jews, that they are going to take delivery of trucks to use against the Russians. The British and the Americans can see that this is a potential bombshell, and they want to have absolutely nothing to do with the Nazi deal.
For Rudolf Vrba, the 15th of May 1944 was the day he had dreaded and risked everything to prevent. Despite his heroic escape and desperate bid to warn the Jews of Hungary that they were about to be murdered in the gas chambers of Auschwitz, the deportations began. It appeared his report had made no effect whatsoever.
The extermination of 600,000 Hungarian Jews was the fastest campaign during the entire Holocaust. It went on with incredible speed, so there was not much time for reflection.
On May the 17th, 1944, the first 40-wagon train, carrying as many as 4,000 Hungarian Jews, left for Auschwitz. At the camp, the Nazis bypassed the selection process and marched all the prisoners straight into the gas chambers. Auschwitz crematoria could barely keep up, and a pall of smoke permanently hung in the air.
When the Hungarian Jews came, the gas chambers were too small really to murder such huge numbers of people coming all at the same time.
Dismayed that his attempts to warn the Hungarian Jews had failed, Vrba fled for the safety of the Slovakian mountains, fearful that he too may be arrested and sent back to Auschwitz.
Vrba was a very angry man, because he became convinced that had his report been acted upon by the Jewish leadership in Budapest, they could have stopped hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews from, as he would put it, boarding the trains.
Hidden away, Vrba was powerless to help the people he had risked everything for. Deeply troubled, he confided in a childhood sweetheart.
When I met him again, I really didn't recognize him because he's changed so much. His expression from a sort of friendly, cheerful young boy totally changed. He told me everything. He told me how the death factories in Auschwitz were organized. And he was very articulate about it and very precise about describing all the things that he has witnessed there.
Despite feeling powerless, there was still some hope. His report might still reach the Allies. Could they stop the bloodshed? In 1944, Rudolf Vrba escaped from Auschwitz to warn the Jews of Hungary that Hitler was planning their extermination. But the very people he had hoped would publicize the threat kept his warnings quiet, believing it might jeopardize a deal struck with the Nazis.
Why didn't they broadcast information about the report to the Jews of Hungary? And the answer, I think, is that it was pointless.
Jewish resistance to the Nazis had already proved futile throughout Europe.
There was no way that Jews could resist a whole army. There's nothing they could do, nothing whatsoever.
As the Nazis steadily increased the speed of the Hungarian deportations, the massacre at Auschwitz continued. Up to 12,000 Hungarian Jews were gassed and burned each day. In Budapest, Rudolf Kastner, who'd refused to publicize Vrba's report, waited desperately for news that the Allies were prepared to trade trucks with the Nazis in exchange for Hungarian Jews. But the news never came.
Kastner has heard nothing. He's desperately trying to fool Eichmann into believing that the Allies are taking the offer of trucks for Jews seriously.
The game of bluff suited Eichmann perfectly. The longer it took to make a deal, the more Jews he could send to the gas chambers.
He knew that every day that these negotiations went on, another 12,000 Hungarian Jews were being murdered.
As Kastner became increasingly desperate to strike a deal of any kind, he tried to bluff Eichmann that the Allies were genuinely considering trading trucks for Jews.
He says to Eichmann, look, how are the Allies going to be convinced if they see trains rolling every day to Auschwitz? What you've got to do is to free some Jews. What you've got to do is to send a train to freedom. Eventually, in an extraordinary game of bluff and bargaining, Kastner manages to raise the number of Jews to be allowed to go to safety as a gesture of goodwill to over 1,600.
However, for some, Kastner's train to freedom was a hollow victory. As his hand-picked Jews were released, the Hungarian deportations to Auschwitz continued.
To this day, he remains an extraordinarily divisive figure. Those who regard him as a hero who bargained with the devil, and some who regard him as a traitor who sold his soul to the devil.
Vrba had all but given up hope of the world ever discovering the truth about Auschwitz. Then, in June 1944, 2 months after he dictated his report, copies finally reached the Pope, the British and American governments. On June the 18th, the BBC broadcast the shocking details. 2 days later, extracts were published in the New York Times. Vrba's quest had finally succeeded. The truth was out. The Americans threatened reprisals against anyone connected to the Hungarian deportations. Despite this, the Hungarian puppet head of state, Admiral Horthy, under the control of Hitler, did nothing. The deportations to Auschwitz continued. On the 2nd of July, the US Air Force attacked Budapest in a terrifying bombing raid. Horthy believed the bombing was a direct result of the international pressure stirred up by Vrba's report. In fact, it was a complete coincidence.
And quite by chance, by a sheer accident of history, the Americans bombed Budapest. And the Hungarian Regent Admiral Horthy, in a panic, said this deportation has to stop.
The deportations were over. Although more than 300,000 had been murdered, 120,000 Jews were instantly saved.
Vrba's work had had this amazing rescue aspect. It had saved all those lives.
I think he has achieved with his report all and more that was possible to achieve. It did save my life and the life of others who knew about the report.
Following the D-Day landings, the Americans, British and Canadians pushed from the west, the Soviets attacked from the east. As the Nazi reign of terror began to collapse, the Russians moved into Poland and liberated Auschwitz on January the 27th, 1945. In the years after the war, Rudolf Kastner moved to Israel, but his negotiations with Eichmann were never forgotten. And in 1957, he was assassinated. Rudolf Vrba married his childhood sweetheart, Gerda Sidanova. He then moved to Canada, where he became Associate Professor of Pharmacology at the University of British Columbia.
Vrba was the figure without whom none of this could have come to pass. Vrba was the thread, if you like, which ran through this extraordinary story of deception and rescue.
Fred Wetzler died in 1988. Rudolf Vrba died in 2006.